And hello to those that are joining us as we speak, and welcome to our webinar series. Our next webinar in this series is Leadership in a Crisis, and our expert today, joining us, we're very thankful that she's with us, is the James Cook University's Chief of Staff, Vanessa Cannon. Vanessa, amongst other things, provides support on a range of governance and management issues. She also oversees and directs and coordinates a range of cross-portfolio strategic initiatives at the university, and she's the university's critical incident coordinator and is extremely well placed to talk about leadership in a crisis. Hello, Vanessa. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much, Wade. Lovely to be here this afternoon.
Yeah, great to have you. I guess the format of today, you're going to talk a little bit about leadership in a crisis, and also there'll be some time at the end for some questions. And obviously our webinar participants have joined us and are joining us as we speak. And you can send in your questions, of course, through the webinar, but also you can email tel@tel.com.au, and we'll hopefully have time at the end of Vanessa's presentation to answer some of those questions. A real topical matter in particular, what's happening at the moment with the COVID-19 crisis, and to talk us through a little bit about that. And I know we spoke before this, an interesting topic too in terms of your presentation, Vanessa. What have you called today's presentation? You can sort of tell us why.
I've called it "It's All My Fault," actually, and there's a number of aspects about why, in particular, the COVID-19 crisis is my fault. But I will also talk about how what being in leadership potentially means when I say it's all my fault.
Fantastic. Well, I'll hand over to you. We look forward to the presentation, and afterwards we'll touch base with a few questions.
Thanks very much, Wade. I do have a bit of a presentation to run to, so I will now share that with you, and hopefully you can all now see my screen. And as Wade said, it's called It's All My Fault. I've been given a fairly significant task here to talk about leadership in a crisis in 45 minutes. There's whole reams of series and webinars and trainings just on leadership alone, let alone on crisis management, and then obviously putting the two together. But I'll do my best in 45 minutes. I do tend to speak at a rapid rate, but we'll see how we go there. And I do hope there will be time for questions at the end as well, if anybody has anything to ask. A disclaimer though, any views expressed in this presentation are those of me, the presenter. Whilst I may be too much to the Director of Marketing, Graham Wilcox, satisfaction, branded completely, James Cook University, including the shirt, this is my personal views and experience that I'm passing on here. Firstly, when talking about leadership in a crisis and leadership in general, you actually have to establish some credentials, and such as they are, this is firstly me. So I actually am a qualified librarian. This will surprise many people who actually know me. Needless to say, I've never worked in a library in my life, and at least the transition to the army, I was always saying that I could still wear the hairbun and the comfortable shoes. But my roles within Army were particularly diverse. I have been an aide-de-camp, commanding a company within the 3 supply company here in Townsville, actually, 84 soldiers and a few $1 million worth of equipment. And I actually served on operations over in East Timor with the then Colonel Stu Smith with the Big Blue 1 RAR. Back in 2003. From the Army, I then transitioned into the university in a number of roles, but predominantly in executive support and sort of roles as executive officer to the Vice Chancellor, the then Bernard Malden, before Sandra Harding arrived. And now in the role of Chief of Staff. And, Chief of Staff, what does it actually mean? Sometimes I wonder. But for me, it means, and you won't be able to read this, and I don't expect you to, but this is the range of portfolio that I am responsible for at James Cook University and have been since 2014. I have responsibility around media and communications, Secretariat and Records, which supports the corporate governance, councils and management committees, the Office of the Vice Chancellor, of course, and also legal and assurance. So all the legal services, internal audit, risk, and compliance issues, insurance, and so on. But I'm also, as stated previously, the university's critical incident coordinator. So as the Chief of Staff and the issues that we've had to deal with over the last few years, well, since I've been in the role since 2014 when it was created. You know, we're an organisation of 5,000 staff, 22,000 students across multiple cities and campuses, and international, actually, with our campus in Singapore as well. We do a range of activities from boating and diving, field trips in remote areas, particularly and overseas, from Borneo to Zambia, medical placements and other placements across the globe. We provide effectively power and water infrastructure to commercial tenants on campus. We have 1,200 students at capacity on campus and student accommodation. You know, we're a little bit of a mini city here, I suppose, when you think about it out here in Douglas, in Townsville, and of course in Cairns and more broadly. So the types of issues we've had to deal with, you know, we've had contact tracing previously through infectious TB, meningococcal. We actually had 3 students arrested in Bolivia for trying to take explosives onto a plane into Rio. Julian Messi, I'll remember that name forever. Respect Now Always campaign. These are the sorts of issues we've had to deal with around sexual assault and sexual harassment on university campuses. Some may be aware of that. We had, unfortunately, with that population, suicides and the particular demographic are not as uncommon as we would like, but we did have a particular issue with a suicide in university halls. Rowan Longbottom in 2017, which was particularly an issue to deal with. We've had a volunteer bitten by a shark, Matthew Vickers. Unfortunately, in Cairns, we've had a contractor fall to his death on the campus, so on the JCU as a worksite, Sol Fagan, survived by his wife and 2 kids. We've had cyclones and other disasters impact on the campus, students, mental health issues, attempts at self-harms, missing students, protest activity, and all of the things you can see there, deaths and accidental. And unfortunately, at the end of last year, we even lost one of our long-term lecturers, David Mitchell, within psychology, who'd been here for 19 years at JCU, who unfortunately passed away in his office. Hijack and theft. We had someone in Tanzania hijacked and a robbery was undertaken at the time as well. So there's been a few issues, but I must say 2019 was a bit biblical. And this is where I get to where it's my fault, I added to the pain for 2020. So, you know, 2019 was a particular year of calamity in Townsville in particular. And I talk about the plagues of Egypt here, inflicted, you know, on Egypt by the God of the Israelites. You know, the water turning to blood, boils, a plague of frogs, and so on. Well, for JCU and Townsville, we had several things. We had the monsoon rain event and flooding. We had a fire in our university halls. You know, I say this with tongue in cheek, and we had pestilence, or in our case, I call that the media. So my apologies to anybody from the Townsville Bulletin online or in that profession. But it seemed that we were on the paper, on the front page almost every second at some point there, and PH Deviant as a headline still, and front page still sticks in my memory. But then we now have the plague, because I remember saying in 2019, you know, we've had fire, we've had flood, we'll have pestilence. The only thing we need now is a plague. So now we have the COVID-19 virus and have a plague. So my apologies. It is my fault. I brought it on us. People will be familiar with and have deep memories of the monsoon event in the first week of February last year. Several people across Townsville, of course, still feeling the impacts of that flooding event. And that was in February. And then in April at 12:57 a.m. on Thursday morning, the 4th of April, I got a phone call from Wayne Martin, our security, one of our security officers, saying, Vanessa, University Halls is on fire, which was an interesting comment to wake up to. It was a very different response required, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, between a monsoon event and the fire. But this fire event, there were 247 students impacted on the night, and luckily 2 weeks prior to this they had actually done a fire drill. So the students who were acting as wardens and the RAs did an absolute superb job on this night. There were no injuries at all in this fire event. It was a phenomenal response too, I must say, from the university. So within 7 days, we had reopened a disused wing, Clark Wing on campus, and within 28 days, we had an entire demountable village on campus, accommodating the remaining 140 odd students, while still dealing with the impacts of the floods, mind you, that occurred in February from the estate perspective. So our estate people were absolutely being flogged, our workplace health and safety people, our student support officers, our counsellors, and of course our accommodation staff in the student accommodation as well. But I must say, when you get that phone call at 12:57 a.m., there's a fire on the campus as I'm driving onto campus, the brain is racing about the things that need to be done now to support those students and to manage the university's response to an incident of this nature. And, you know, a couple of things out of the fire event. You know, you have to be particularly conscious in responding to a crisis event that it can go one of two ways. It can go from bad to worse, or when, you know, in this particular perspective, we had a lot of students who were deeply impacted, and I completely acknowledge that. But the response by the university at the time, actually, I think it was a good one. You know, we were particularly responsive to the parents of the students. They'd entrusted these students onto on-campus accommodation. They were getting the information from the university about what we were doing to support them, and they were very, very, very thankful for that. So there's a bit of a lesson that if you don't manage a crisis well, there is potentially no recovery. If you don't manage a crisis well, there is potentially no recovery. So in thinking about how we would respond to the fire and how we respond to any crisis, some of the things that go through your head are, as the person who's going to be coordinating this response, is, you know, what's happened, what needs to be done, and who needs to do it effectively. What's happened, what needs to be done, and who needs to do it. So I must say that drive onto the campus, when I heard there was a fire, I was going through in my head, all right, what are the immediate issues that we need to be thinking about? Who do I need to have around the table to be assisting me here? You know, what are the supports that I can start bringing into play straight away? So going back to, you know, leadership in a crisis and trying to talk about what leadership actually is, and what is different about potentially leading in a crisis versus just leading at any other time. Leadership is actually not about you as the person who's supposedly in charge or in control. There's a whole bunch of things that actually have to occur to prepare you for managing crisis events. And so I actually quite like this framework that is produced by the International Consortium of Organisational Resilience about ensuring that organisations are resilient. And this could be applied actually both individually at an organisation level, but also at a community level, because it's actually quite a useful model. And I will share my slides. And of course, this will be available, as Wade has said, afterwards to sort of to go through this as well. Or you can just Google, actually. The International Consortium of Organisational Resilience. But, you know, a lot of it is around your planning and preparedness, how you deliver activity during the response, and again, having a very, very key focus on actually the recovery too. So I actually quite like this as a model, and it speaks to the entire organisation, because unless the entire organisation is actually aware and working for you, your response is not going to be in any way coordinated, consistent, or communicated well. So as I said, this is a particularly useful model for me, and it's all really about how you adapt to and manage change, particularly in times of great stress, really. So that planning, preparedness, response and recovery, it's all well and good to say that, knowing your risk environment, knowing your, you know, what sort of crises might actually be impacting on your business or organisation. You know, in North Queensland, we have certain known events that we know about. You know, the there's a known lead-up time. We have a cyclone warning watch, then we have a cyclone warning. It has a particular cycle. We get lots of information from the Bureau of Meteorology. We have local disaster management group coordination information being provided, and it has a prescribed time frame. You know that once it hits the coast, the eye goes past, and then the rest of it goes past, and then it's about assessing damage and undertaking works after that. So, planning for those sorts of events, we have to do those every year. Then you've got those incidents where there is no lead up. It's an emergency response. It's a short time frame. And those are the things like the fire event that I've talked about, and potentially even a workplace death. When you get that phone call that, the ambulance is on the way, and we have staff and students in the workplace who are exceptionally distressed given what's occurred. The different type of responses required for that are different. But the same sort of principles of what you need to put in place apply. So, in any workplace death, next of kin notification, who has responsibility for that? What counselling and supports are required? How are you working and work with the emergency services? How are you controlling the actual workplace and access to and the information and so on? So the same sorts of things apply, but you may have less time to actually react and respond. And then, of course, you've got the other instance where you've got no lead up, you've got no time frame. You don't know how broad the impact is going to be. It may be that there's sustained activity and response required. And I think COVID-19 is an excellent example of that with the pandemic. Whilst there is a lot of planning and preparedness, and luckily enough, well, I say luckily enough, I wrote it back in 2009, the university had a pandemic plan, and we had a pandemic plan in response to the various influenza academics, play on words from a university, epidemics that we're going through at the time. So swine flu, bird flu, we had MERS, we had SARS, and all the rest of it. So we wrote a really prescriptive or comprehensive pandemic plan. And for us, luckily enough, we could pull that off the shelf, brush the dust off it and go, right, a couple of the people's names are changed in here, but it's still applicable to deal with the COVID-19 response and the directions from government. There are pretty consistent things that you would need to manage in that. Things like managing your vacancy rates within your workforce, leave options, support to grieving staff if it unfortunately has high mortality rates, management of outbreaks. How do you lock down workplaces and workspaces? Working with the public health unit about contact tracing, cleaning regimes, messaging. All of these things are things you can have in place. You may not cover off absolutely everything, but some of the responses and the supports you provide are consistent regardless of the type of crisis. So, communication, there's a consistent requirement to have a proper and appropriate form of communication throughout. Knowing who is responsible and for what, and what your delegations are on authorities, who will be communicating, and so on. And so for JCU, our response, we have a critical incident management team, as was described. It has a core group of people across both the estate, our ICT services, student support, workplace health and safety, HR. Luckily we have the luxury of being a large organisation, I suppose, where those are distinct and discrete functions and people. In smaller organisations, you might have people that are wearing several hats, so you have to worry about how they are being supported in delivering what needs to be done through a crisis. But communications is exceptionally important. Having that central and consistent single source of truth is important, particularly in large organisations where you've got very comprehensive contact points. I mean, we have individual academics who communicate with cohorts of students. So it's about ensuring that the consistent messaging is getting across about what the university's response is in these times. Communications are exceptionally important, and particularly when I talk about words are important there. I mean, it's all well and good to say essential services and essential activity and essential staff, but what does essential actually mean? When we say essential travel, only essential travel is allowed. That is down to individual interpretation in a lot of respects, and I'll tell you, some people think they're more essential than others when in reality, they're probably not. So, having that consistent, clear communication is very, very important. So from our perspective, we had the Vice-Chancellor. She was providing all of the communications to the staff and students as the organisation's response. And then I was communicating with all the senior management group to ensure that we were complying with, consistent with, and enacting what we needed to be doing. You've got to know your stakeholders. So for us, it's not just about our staff and students, but it's actually about our broader community. Particularly in the fire event, we were particularly conscious that we didn't want to put further impact on the shortage of housing within the community by all of a sudden having 247 students who no longer had a home. But also, as I said again, the parents, the home institutions of our international students, particularly in the US, were very concerned about what the university's response was in supporting their son or daughter or their student here, across the ocean. And always in this, you've also got to have in mind to what is required now, what is going to be required tomorrow, and what is going to be required next week. It's not just single event things that you need to be worrying about. And the thing I put at the bottom here, it's people. It's always about the people. And you've got to keep that front of mind. What you do and what impact that's actually going to have on the people. And what I've put in there as well is about how you act. If you, as the person who's facilitating and coordinating or leading the university's business's response to this, how you act is important. If you act as if you've got no idea what's going on and you have no control, then that doesn't instill a lot of confidence in the team around you or your stakeholders. You've always got to be conscious of how you're acting when you're in informal or formal communications or working with your stakeholders. And of course, then you've got the recovery effort, and depending on what sort of crisis you're managing, complacency is what will kill you. Complacency, as soon as you start thinking everything's right and we're back to normal, complacency will trip you up, and you have to worry about fatigue. As I said, we have even though we've got some depth in our people and our resources, even just dealing with the fire. Our people were getting to the point of exhaustion because it was crisis upon crisis. We were dealing with basically 2 events in a very short time frame. So you have to be very careful of fatigue as managing that team. You have to celebrate the wins when you get them, and as I said, communicate constantly, and learning the lessons. It is always important. It is always important to reflect on what went well and what didn't. What went well and what didn't. What could have been done differently? How could this have been handled better? Hindsight is always a great thing, but what you're wanting to do is obviously ensure that the next time something occurs, you are better prepared. So you have to learn the lessons. And so for us, in trying to get out of the COVID-19 response, what we've got to be very conscious of is that we are it's going to be a slow and phased return, that we maintain the same sort of consistent communications and support to our staff and students coming out of the restrictions as we did going in. So I'll just finish up then with a couple of personal insights. And as I said, it's a big topic to sort of cover and in 45 minutes. And I'm more than happy to answer questions after this, but just a couple of personal insights if I can. Remembering my disclaimer, this is the world according to me. So, when you're presented with a huge task, it can seem overwhelming at first, and it may seem absolutely insurmountable. But I always go back to that chunking. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you've actually just got to make a start. Also, as someone who chairs some fairly significant coordinated activity across the university, multitasking is not actually a thing. You can't be doing half a dozen things at once. You need to be providing particular focused attention to an issue at the time, but that doesn't mean that concurrent activity can't happen. Anybody with ex-military background will understand completely what I mean by concurrent activity, but other people can be getting on with particular tasks and activities, but you can't try to be doing everything. Quite frankly, as the person who should be leading the team on this. And so therefore delegation is important. And knowing when to get involved or not. If it's all well and good to delegate, and you've got to have your trust in the team, that they know their requirements, they know the parameters they're working in, they know their limits of authority, the delegations they have. But if you see something going off the rails, or you're a bit concerned about what's happening, you need to get involved. And also, this one from my mother, actually. She always used to say to me, this too shall pass. So, this too shall pass. There is a time to everything, quite frankly. So, where did I learn all this, quite frankly? Well, I tell you, that staff cadet, and that's actually me, had no idea. I'll tell you that right now. I think this is at the end of an exercise, and we'd just been told we had to go up and clean the armoury again or something or other, because Lizzie Bolton looks like her cat has just been killed, and Leslie Bishaw, who's another friend of mine, is not looking too happy either. So, mistakes, the other thing, and this is important about the lessons learned, mistakes will be made, that's sort of guaranteed, but it's about how you improve your working relationships and your processes in doing that as well. And a lot of it's about perspective and attitude, actually. A lot of it's actually about perspective and attitude, particularly when you're under pressure. You may not have all the information, and the rules may change daily on you, as they did every time the National Cabinet met at the beginning of this year around travel and borders and restrictions and public gatherings. The rules were changing pretty much every day. So you need to use your judgment, experience, and the advice of others, and make decisions based on what you know at the time, and with the business and stakeholders at front of mind. So you have to make decisions. Sometimes you may not have all the information, but you make them with the best judgment and for the best purposes. So it's around the reasons and the basis of why you're doing things. And it's about the people around you as well, because you can't do this just by yourself. There's Leslie. She's a lot happier than she was in the previous one, and that's Lizzie Bolton. And that one's me, if you can't tell with all the camouflage. This was the end of a particularly interesting exercise, a food and sleep deprivation one, to test our stress levels when I was a cadet. And you may have noticed that I've used a lot of people's names throughout this presentation as well. As I said, it's always about the people. So Julian, who got arrested, Rowan, who unfortunately suicided within University Halls, Hayley Shoon, who is Sol Fagan's wife, I talk to regularly. It's all about the people, and you have to remember that in leadership. And you also have to know that there will inevitably be a crisis. There will inevitably be a crisis, and we're in the middle of one, which is impacting many people in many different ways. First rule, this is the first rule I always tell my daughter. First rule, what's the first rule, Madeline? Don't panic. Luck is always a factor. Luck is always a factor. We were very lucky with the accommodation fire that the NRL Cowboys house was empty because their students were at home during the secondary school and primary school break. So we were able to be accommodating our students temporarily in the NRL Cowboys house, and we are forever grateful to them for that. So luck is always a factor in any of these things. No one was injured during that fire. Use external help when you can get it, and we had a significant amount of help during that fire event from the police, the Red Cross, Department of Housing and Public Works in getting our infrastructure up and the village up. Use external help where you can get it. It's there for a reason. If you need it, get it. Humour goes a long way, I must say. Sometimes just that little bit of light relief takes the pressure out of what may be a very tense situation. It has to be the right humour though. You have to be very careful of that. People just need to know that someone is in control and there's a plan, right? In that fire event, I had that 12:57 a.m. Call. I was there with the students throughout the night and throughout the morning, and then I was giving daily briefings to the students every day for a week at lunchtime. It's the first time I'd been Facebook live streamed. That was novel. I was particularly conscious that towards the, certainly over the weekend, we had parents and other family in the room as well. So I wasn't just talking to the students, I was talking to their family and support networks as well. And what they needed to know that someone's in control and there's a plan. And you have to say things again and again and again. People under stress need to hear the message several times over, because it may take the second or third time for them to actually get it, right? And you have to be consistent. apparently coffee is not suitable for rehydration. The Red Cross had a go at me one day because I was obviously on about my 5th coffee, and they were concerned about how I was hydrating during these times. My answer of coffee was not appropriate, allegedly. But I think that the base of that is you actually have to look after yourself. There is a lot of pressure and responsibility on you as the leader. And so you also have to make sure that you are looking after yourself and doing what you need to ensure that you are bringing your best mind, your best judgment to the table at the time. And I had a lot of people around me on all occasions who have been very concerned about my health as well. So fatigue and stress affect different people in different ways too, all right? And particularly if you are moving from disaster to disaster. I mean, there will be people who are impacted by the flood event, who are now having to cope with the loss of income, financial support, job, family disruption on a whole bunch of levels. So fatigue and stress affect different people in different ways, and these can be cumulative. You have to be aware of the cumulative nature of these things. You know, when we were responding to the fire event, Hilary Kavanagh, who's the director of our estate office, he had lost his home, and he, with his wife and 4 kids, and yet he was having to manage the university's response to the monsoon flood event and then to the fire event. There are a lot of different pressures that are on people, you know, you just have to be conscious that you are supporting your staff and not only the professional, but in sometimes the personal, because they will bleed into each other. So, you know, as I said, our estate office and our workplace health and safety team, Andrew Redcliffe and Drew and the others, have been working very hard for a prolonged and protracted period. When you're asked for advice and guidance, you know, give it. Don't do the work. They're not, you know, if someone is just asking for advice, just provide advice, or what I would do in a particular situation, or have you considered, but don't do the task for them. That's not necessarily what they're asking for. Or if they do want you to do something, perhaps do some mentorship and learning within the team for that. But also don't be afraid to ask for advice and guidance either. People want to help. Take it when you can, but learn to say no. People will always surprise you. You don't have to have all the good ideas, and people will always come up with new solutions, new ways, or great ideas, you know, or fantastic responses in the face of extreme adversity. Know your insurance policy. In the event of a significant business disruption and potentially massive loss, it's important to understand how the policy is going to respond. So you need to know your insurance policy. Even more problematic for us up here now in North Queensland, I know, given the difficulty in getting particularly property insurance and coverage and the issues that we have to deal with up here. So know how your insurance policy is going to respond. There is always something to learn, always. Every time I learn something new, either about the organisation, about what it is that we do as an organisation, the people that we have in it, or the things that need to be considered in a crisis. And I guess one of the last things, goodwill and dedication can trump poor planning. Okay, they can, but nothing will trump negligence. Nothing will trump negligence. So, you know, all of that preparation and planning beforehand is not wasted. It's not wasted. If you have not had the chance, or you've got something completely new in front of you that you've never dealt with before, you know, you have to go back to first principles and what is it that needs to happen, and who do I need to support, and what do I have access to, and who's the team that can help me. But nothing will trump negligence. If you are have done the wrong thing, unfortunately, that's again a creation of another crisis for you. And finally, whether you do good or you do bad in a leadership position, it will always be your fault, always. So that's where I started. It was my fault, and that's where I finish. And I'd be more than pleased to take any questions.
Vanessa, thanks very much. Fascinating presentation. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. But,
sorry, there was a lot.
No, you're right. And you set it up beautifully in terms of, you know, it's such a broad area, not only leadership, but leadership in a crisis. I guess the first thing, you know, you touched on, you know, those plans, and obviously the university's got the resources to do those, you know, the pandemic plans and those sort of things. For a small to medium business, it is, I guess the message is it doesn't have to be a big document in terms of either business continuity plan or crisis management plan. It could be a few pages. What are probably the key things people need to consider having in those sort of plans?
Yeah, and you know, Google is a wonderful thing. You know, to Google, it's actually an adverb in the Macquarie Dictionary now. There are a plethora of templates, and in fact, it was always interesting at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis how many organisations had the tool for you, regardless of your size, to assist you through this. So you know, it is about what works for you. But I think the principles are around. You know, in preparing for a particular crisis, is what is your communication strategy? Who are my stakeholders? What are the immediate things that I need to take care of as far as, and identifying those stakeholders? It's my board, if I have a board. It's my directors, if I have directors. It's my employees. It's my customers. You know, and if you are, a motor vehicle workshop, or if you are a retail shop in a mall, you know, some of those key principles are, who are my stakeholders? What's my communication strategy? And how can I deliver my business differently in this time? So,
I guess the other thing too, which really stood out for me at the start, was I think what you said, what's happened, what needs to be done, and who needs to do it. Like, to me, that's just what, not that you can predict these things, but I guess is the message, providing you've got some frameworks around what you would do in those instances, it can make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the way you can actually then just break it down. And so, for a smaller business, some of that stuff may actually take up just one page. Stakeholders, list them, communication methods, what do they need to know and when do they need to know it? So yeah, it can be brief, or just dot points or pointers to you when you're under the stress to go, right, where's my cheat sheet? These are things I need to be taking into account.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that stood out was the graph that you showed, the emotional highs and lows and the journey through, I guess, a crisis. What's your view on the current COVID-19? Because, it's not something you can actually see. So people being, isolated and not having that regular contact with staff. I know for a fact that people I know and myself, you're going through that almost daily. As an organisation, how important is it to make sure you're, I guess, checking in?
Sorry, I'm just reacting to Maury Saw's comment on the line.
For the participants, it was about has the US president seen this presentation? Councillor, I'm not sure if he's tuned in at the moment. So
I would say a big fat no. So, how do you check in with the welfare of people in a protracted environment? This, getting back to your original question. So you can do that on a number of levels. So your organisation, your business, it needs to know how they can get into contact with you. What's your regular check-ins? How, for my office in particular, as part of a broader organisation, each of my managers has a daily catch-up with their team on Zoom. Right, what are we doing today? How's everybody going? I know more about my team's pets, houses, or the room in which they're doing their study or work, and children than perhaps I've ever known previously. At the end of the week, I always have a Chief of Staff Office catch-up, and we have a competition. So I started this at the beginning of the week. Right, this week we're going to have a competition about the worst isolation haircut. The first week I ran it was cutest pet. Oh my Lord! I wish I hadn't done that, because it was like judging people's children. I don't think it's terrible. Worst shirt award. Any point of human contact. People are social creatures. We're we depending on your preference, we either hunt in packs or we're herd animals. We like that human contact and engagement, and it's difficult over Zoom. It's difficult over a phone, but I think those check-ins at the very personal level are worth it. In the context of a broader framework around, for larger organisation, about a reminder about the supports available. If we were very early out on, if you're vulnerable or if you're caring for someone from vulnerable, work from home straight away, or there's carers leave that's available. Or access any other type of leave arrangements that you would like that would suit your circumstance. Addressing people's concerns and fears and anxieties, when, as you say, on a virus, you can't necessarily touch it, feel it, see it. There is a lot of anxiety. So, about that consistent messaging too. I said, so our messages are broadcast across all of our audio-visual screens, broadcast across the website was, personal hygiene, social distancing, and if you're unwell, stay away from the workplace, and that was effectively it.
Yeah.
So.
And now, as you said, like those check-ins and really focusing on that well-being of your staff. Another one that sort of comes up quite often is being able to make decisions where there's so much uncertainty around, and I'm sure people watching, and even yourself, you would have a view on Monday that might change by Wednesday. How do you sort of form those decisions when there's a lot of uncertainty, where you have to make calls and you have to make decisions?
Yeah, no, exactly right. So, it was when the borders were starting to shut down too, and, there was a little bit of lack of coordination between the states and the federal government before they established the National Cabinet about which states would be going early on which particular calls, and before the National Health response plan got enacted. So from our perspective, we were getting directions from Queensland Health, we were getting directions from Queensland Education, we were also getting directions from the federal government Department of Education. It's about making the decisions based on your personal circumstance and what suits your organisation. So we went actually a bit further in some of the early decisions about travel and restrictions on campus, than was probably required, but in the basis of the fact that the information was changing daily, that suited our circumstance. And in the end, 2 days later, they were at the point that we were anyway. So it is, and reiterating to people too, that this is a particularly dynamic environment. We are responding to what we need to do as far as the government's requirements, our staff and student requirements, and trying to minimise disruption to study, which has been a mammoth issue, but also community expectations. I mean, if we had continued to operate laissez-faire, as I said, we have people around the globe, one of the key things that was a concern for us was to not be the site of infection for Townsville. Let's not be James Cook University bringing coronavirus to Townsville. That was a big issue for us. So it was really around how we ensured that we were managing our staff and our students and our environment to ensure that we were meeting the guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, as you said, it's about getting those facts, assessing them, and then making the decision regardless, because that's one component of leadership, isn't it? You just can't not make a decision and leave.
Correct. Yeah, you can't. And in fact, that's when you'll get into worse trouble. And in fact, not making a decision is a decision, as an unfortunate one perhaps. So you have to make decisions based on the facts known at the time, but have a bit of a forethought about, well, this is probably the trend. I mean, with the pandemic, I benefited hugely from the expertise of our epidemiologists around the table. So I must admit, Maxine Whitaker and Jan, from the public health school, the discipline, provided absolutely essential knowledge and advice to us about what would be the path of pandemic, the national guidelines, the WHO response, and all the rest of it. So, you have to if you don't know, get the advice and get the expertise. Now, if you're a small organisation, you might have to go externally to, to a government agency. You might have to go externally to, a larger affiliated association or a professional group, but get the advice. I want to make a decision on, but I just want to check.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good points. We're nearly out of time. Anything else to sum up, Vanessa, or some, I guess asking for a key takeaway in such a broad subject is almost a bit harsh to do, but is there anything that we've missed?
No, look, and I'm more than approachable too. So if anybody wanted to follow up after this, my email's pretty easy. It's chiefofstaff@JCU. So I'd be more than happy to follow up after this as well. And I've even got some of those templates that I was talking about if you wanted to have a look at your business continuity planning. A key takeaway, the team around you, that's the important thing. I have an absolutely fantastic team here at the university who are so committed and have been so, enthusiastic in the support they've been providing to the students, first and foremost, to each other, it has been absolutely phenomenal. So I think the importance of the team, it will always be your fault. You're the person that makes the decision, but you have to rely on the support of your team around you.
Yeah, fantastic advice and insights. Well, we're going to leave it there. As you said, you're open for questions. Any questions that we get through, we'll certainly pass on to you and post them on our Townsville Enterprise website. As well, those on the webinar, this will be on our website and be able to be viewed at a later date as well. So with that all said and done, Vanessa Cannon, Chief of Staff from James Cook University, thank you for your time and your presentation. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next Thursday afternoon with another webinar. Until then, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.